Do people simply vanish? Any number of things can abruptly happen to people every single day. And accidents do happen. But when there is a clear pattern, you simply cannot ignore it. Between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada, is a 450-mile stretch of Highway 16, which is infamous for several cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women beginning in the 1970s. This stretch of road is widely known as the Highway of Tears. Now, not all the victims are Indigenous women. However, the vast majority of them are. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a pattern we cannot ignore. The area is somewhat remote and largely isolated, so it's a perfect place for someone to suddenly go missing. There isn't an exact number on how many people have gone missing, but according to the RCMP Project Ipana, which is a provincially funded project from 2005 that focuses on the unsolved murders and disappearances along the highway, claim there are less than 18 victims. This project began with 3 cases in 2005 and sought to uncover whether these murders were from a single serial killer or multiple separate acts. The RCMP uses 3 criteria when reviewing missing and murdered women cases to determine whether they are included in the Project Ipana investigations. 1. The victim was involved in a high-risk activity that would expose them to danger, such as hitchhiking or being involved in street trade, aka prostitution. 2. The victim was last seen, or their body was discovered, within 1 mile of British Columbia Highway 16. 3. They were female. Only a year later, the unit had 9 cases being investigated, and by 2007, the caseload had doubled to 18. Out of the 9 cases in 2006, 8 of them were Indigenous women. At this point, the unit was investigating murders and disappearances in a much larger area than just Highway 16. Their search area doubled and included not only Highway 16, but also sections of Highways 97 and Highway 5. The RCMP utilized computer software known as VICLAS, or Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System, as well as other databases to broaden their search. These cases received a lot of criticism from the community, saying the media coverage for them were limited because the majority of the victims were Aboriginal women. Nicole Hoare, a Caucasian woman who disappeared in 2002, received much more media coverage than any of the previous Indigenous women of the same fate. And many believed if it weren't for Nicole, the unit may have never been created in the first place. Many Aboriginal organizations dispute the RCMP's numbers, estimating the number of murdered and missing women ranges above 40. This is a comprehensive list of the victims who have either vanished or been murdered on the Highway of Tears. The list goes on and on. Municipalities and 23 First Nations communities border the Highway of Tears. The region is no stranger to poverty and lacks basic public transportation, leading many to resort to hitchhiking. A considerate amount of the victims were last seen hitchhiking throughout Highway 16 before their disappearances. The Human Rights Watch, an international non-governmental organization that conducts research and advocacy on human rights, states that British Columbia has the highest rate of unsolved murders of Indigenous women in Canada. In October 2015, several British Columbia government officials would come under heavy scrutiny after a 65-page report written by Elizabeth Denham accusing them of triple deleting emails related to the Highway of Tears, removing them from the government's computer system, Denham would go on to state that in doing so, these officials breached the Freedom of Information and Protection Privacy Act. This doesn't help the argument against the community's feeling as if the murders and disappearances of these Indigenous women mean practically nothing to high-ranking government officials. After severe pressure from the public, BC Transit created 3 new bus routes along Highway 16. The Ministry of Transportation has reported around 5,000 people have begun using the new bus routes in its first year of service. A number of people have been convicted in cases relating to the Highway of Tears. 3 serial killers are among them. In 2012, an astonishing breakthrough would occur. The Project Ipana unit linked DNA evidence from the murder of Colleen McMillan, a 16-year-old who disappeared in 1974, to an American felon named Bobby Jack Fowler. The RCMP also hinted that he was a suspect in 2 other Highway of Tears cases. These cases were 19-year-olds Gail Ways and Pamela Darlington. 2 years later, a man named Gary Taylor Handlin would confess to an undercover police officer that he committed the murder of Monica Jack. He was charged with first-degree murder for Monica Jack, as well as another case, both going back 40 years. He was found guilty of the murder of Monica Jack in 2019. Cody Legabukov, a 31-year-old Canadian who was convicted in 2014 of murdering 3 women and a teenager. He's one of Canada's youngest convicted serial killers. His victim that is connected to the Highway of Tears is Lauren Dawn Leslie. Lauren had met Cody online, and her body was found in November 2010 on an isolated logging road just off Highway 27 near Fort St. James. Legabukov was pulled over by police and had many of Lauren's belongings as well as her blood on his clothes. His other victims include Jill Stacy Stuchenko, 35-year-old mother of 6, last seen on October 9, 2009. She was found dead 4 days later in a gravel pit on the outskirts of Prince George. Natasha Lynn Montgomery, 23-year-old mother of 2, last seen August 31, 2010. Her body was never found, but her DNA was later found in samples taken in Legabukov's apartment. Cynthia Frances Moss, 35, last seen on September 10, 2010. Her body was found in a Prince George park the following month. Moss died of blunt force trauma to the head and penetrating wounds. She had a hole in her shoulder blade, a broken jaw and cheekbone, and injuries to her neck consistent with someone stomping on it. In 2007, a pig farmer named Robert William Picton was convicted in the murders of 6 women, although DNA and remains of 33 women were found on his land. Several of the women were Aboriginal. Highway 16 will forever be associated with tragedy and heartbreak among the victims' families. Although few improvements are being made, it shouldn't have taken decades for changes to happen. For the residents along Highway 16 and all of the women who are afraid to set foot outside of their homes, I sincerely hope their government officials do better. Patterns such as these cannot continue. I'll see you on the other side.